The Minnesota Vikings have one thing that they can do that'll separate themselves from the rest of the NFL, and it revolves around the Jalen Ramsey trade. So let's break down what a trade could look like from a financial standpoint and why that gives the Vikings an advantage over the rest of the National Football League and how it can result in a Super Bowl. Welcome to the Real Forno Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by the one and only Tyler Forness. A to Z Sports sought him out to be their Minnesota Vikings reporter and NFL analyst. And he's a proud contributor over at SKOL North's Purple Daily. Tyler is also the captivating host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Real Forno Show, and it's new night, Thursday night, sponsored by our friends at Underdog Fantasy. My name is Tyler Forness. With me, as always, in the top left corner is producer Dave. And this is going to be an interesting one because it's revolving around another hypothetical trade for Jalen Ramsey. But one of the big things about this discussion is less about rehashing whether it's a good idea or not, and just understanding as long as it continues to be out there and the Vikings don't add to that cornerback room, it's going to be a discussion point. And I think in that sense, it's good to understand all aspects and avenues of what it could potentially look like. And that's what we're going to try to do today. And I'm not going to tell you here that it's a good idea or a bad idea. That I'm going to leave up to your own devices and whether you think you like the idea or you don't. Because at this point, I think the Vikings are fine at corner. If they have an injury, I'm going to be really concerned. But the way things currently sit, if they stay healthy, I think they're going to be okay. Now, a lot of people don't think that. The national media definitely doesn't think it. And Jalen Ramsey is the highest profile name out there. Jair Alexander was there for a little bit, but he wanted to go play with Lamar. They were college teammates at Louisville. They were in the same draft class. So the Vikings kind of didn't have a chance there because he wanted to go play with Lamar. And by the contract he took, well, it became pretty obvious he just wanted to go play with Lamar. So that is what it is. So why Ramsey? Why not Sauce? Because Ramsey is going to be traded because the Dolphins have said so. Ramsey has asked for it. And Sauce Gardner's not on the trade block. So this isn't talking about like breaking down a super hypothetical where we don't have a obvious path forward. Where with Ramsey, there is an obvious path. One half has already said he's gone. Who wants him? And the Vikings would just have to pick up the phone and negotiate. So that's why we're talking about Ramsey. This isn't a conversation meant for, hey, I think the Vikings should address corner. This isn't a conversation for anything other than, hey, this is going to prevail out there. But the conversation surrounding Jalen Ramsey, I think, is an important one. Why is it important? Because it's also the basis of how the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl and how the Vikings could also use the same process in order to do so. That is also why we're talking about this, because the way that this contract is structured is a very important one. And Dave, I'm actually going to send you here a picture, a graphic that I want you to throw up, and I'll send it to you here in a minute. You'll get it on iMessage, but I think it's really important to have this conversation because there's so many different elements of it. And because there's so many different elements when you're having this conversation, especially when you talk about the Philadelphia Eagles and why this has helped them win a Super Bowl, like Jalen Ramsey himself has the contract that pretty much everybody in the Eagles has. And that's why they've been able to be as deep, talented, and successful as they have. Because they're using a thing called an option bonus. And an option bonus, it's very simple. It works like a signing bonus, but you can give it to players whenever you want. And this is something I wrote about a little while ago, and I think we talked about on this very show. Roger Goodell has actually talked about it. He talked about it at the last owners meetings, where they are considering kind of closing this loophole when it comes to player contracts because it's giving teams an unfair advantage. Now, unfair advantage is a really relative term here because every team can do it and there's nothing stopping them. But it's like when you're kids, one kid's got $20 to go to the movie so he can get popcorn, snow caps, and a huge icy. The other kid just has enough for a ticket. That's kind of what you're looking at here. Everybody is in the same area, in the same playing field. But some owners have enough cash to be able to throw around and do whatever the hell they want. Other owners don't. And we talked about before how the Raiders have been quote unquote cash poor. Cash poor meaning that they can't give out signing bonuses because their ownership does not have enough money to put in an escrow. And this happened from, I'm going to call this BD, before Dave, where players weren't actually getting paid because ownership didn't have money. So what the NFL did with the collective bargaining agreement with the NFLPA was whenever there was fully guaranteed money, all of that money had to be put into escrow. So the players would get paid. And it was a methodology to prevent ownership from stiffing players. Nowadays, you really don't need that, but that practice has never gone away. It's just a safeguard for players to make sure that they're going to get theirs no matter what. And when it came to like the pandemic, you know, a lot of us normal people, those of us who aren't super rich, we're concerned. Like, are we going to still have a job? Are we going to be able to afford our bills? You know, there were those questions. NFL players didn't have to worry because they knew with escrow, they were going to get paid. So that's why like that factors in. But this whole conversation dives into cash over cap. What does that mean? The salary cap is currently set, I think it's $277 or $279.5 million. But the amount of cash the Minnesota Vikings have paid out for the 2025 season is around $362 million. First in the National Football League. They are spending a hefty amount of money. But that also means that money is not being taken into consideration for this year's salary cap. A lot of that is signing bonus. Some of that, like Justin Jefferson, is going to be on an option bonus. And we'll talk about that. Option bonuses are great for players you know are going to stick around because it just helps. It's a device to help you spread out cap hit. But if that player goes kaput, then all of a sudden you're on this huge, you got this huge bill coming due and you got to eat it. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about here today with Jalen Ramsey. Because Ramsey's contract is really not that bad. It feels bad when you look at it on over the cap, but that's from a Dolphins perspective. So let's talk about it from a Vikings perspective. Because from a Vikings perspective, it's really it's really palatable. And Dave, if you would please, if you have that ready to go, I'd love for you to throw up the graphic when talking about Jalen Ramsey. So this is what his contract looks like right now. So 2025, he's only due a base salary of $1.255 million. He's got a $4 million roster bonus, almost $800,000 in per game roster bonuses, and then $100,000 workout. That workout bonus is guarantee you already taken care of. He's not going to earn it because he didn't show up for any of the Dolphins offseason activities. The roster bonus, we currently do not know when it's going to be paid. If it's already been paid, which oftentimes those roster bonuses are paid within like the first 5 days of the league year, or they're paid somewhere around September 1st. Sometimes they have some weird dates like, oh, we're going to pay it in July. But usually those are the times that those get paid. And if you could see on the far left of the screen, sorry for those of you who are audio listeners, I'll do my best. If you want to, there is an article on A to Z Sports that I wrote about this, where this graphic is, and you can take a look while you listen. It looks like a pencil and a piece of paper, that little icon. If you hover over that, Dave can't because this is an image, but on the Over the Cap website, it'll tell you what that's for and what all of those are. Those 25, 26, and 27, those are option bonuses. And when they are paid on August 31st, which is going to be an important date when we're having this conversation. Because if Ramsey is traded before August 31st, the Vikings or whoever takes him theoretically would absorb that entire option bonus. Now, if you take a look, some of the numbers on the left are going to be a little fudged. They're not going to match completely. 2026, if they get rid of him, Jalen Ramsey would only take on $6.7 million debt. That's no. He would, some of that needs to be taken into consideration because those option bonuses aren't structured in because they haven't officially been paid. Signing bonuses are paid. Like pretty much when you sign, that's done. Option bonuses can be put in the contract whenever you want. So some of that is a little not misguided, but it can be a harder thing to kind of look at. So here's what we're going to do today. Dave, if you would throw that back up, please, because I'm going to kind of use this here for a little while. So when you take a look at the option bonus, 2025, $3.796 million. So the option bonus that he's due on August 31st this year is $18.98 million. So that's going to be spread from 2025 through 2029. In 2026, that same August 31st date, he's due an $8.135 million signing bonus, which is why that option bonus number goes up to $5.423 million. Then in 2027, he's due an option bonus of $8.835 million. And that's why you're going to see that go up as I can see Groot on Dave's shirt.
Yeah, hold on. I'm trying to bring you in here.
That is okay. Stuff happens. That's why you see that number go up to $7.19 million. So here's kind of what the discussion point comes with Jalen Ramsey. In year one, Jalen Ramsey's cap hit is only $9.916 million, which means if you add him to this year's salary cap, it is $13.62 million on the Vikings salary cap. That's palatable. That's not bad. Here comes where the problems are, okay? When you have an $18.98 million option bonus and $3.796 million hit year one, basically, if you cut him, it's $15 million dead before the 2026 season. That's a lot of money dead. Now, he is going to cost you on the salary cap next year nearly $19 million, $18.288. So you would technically save some money if he was just going to be a 1-year rental. But that's a lot of cash for a guy who's about to turn 30 years old within the next however long. Dave put in that he's 30. Is he 30 now or is he about to turn 30? Because he's like right at the precipice of that.
I'd have to check.
Like, hold on. He's somewhere between 28 and 30 years old at this very moment because he was drafted, I believe, at the age of 20. So when Dave finds that out, we will share that piece of information. But that's where some of the difficulties lie because it's an option bonus. And unless Jalen Ramsey is willing to negotiate, hey, we want to kind of maneuver with this, we want to restructure how the money is paid out, Ramsey would have the ability to sign off on that, but he would have to agree to whatever changes are made. The only time a player that does not have the ability to change when that money is paid is when base salary or a roster bonus is transitioned into a signing bonus. That is just giving the player money. And the NFL team does not need permission to give them money, which is very, very pro player. Plus, it makes it harder for them to be cut later on, which is also very pro player because it means the player then gets to make even more money, which is why this conversation begins in the first place. So, all in all, the option bonuses make things a little more difficult because it's a $9.9 million cap hit, then it's 18.28, then 20.05, and then in 2028, $31.19 million. Now, of that, $21.1 million is base salary. $2 million of it is roster bonus, $865 in other bonuses, workout and per game record. So what the Vikings could do is be like, hey, you're not worth this much money. We know that you have a cap hit of $31.19 million, but we can cut you and save about $12 million. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take $12 million off your salary, and you're going to make about $9 million in cash plus your bonuses. Everybody wins. But you're also doing that with like almost a 33-year-old player at that point. And would the Vikings be willing to do that? I don't know. But I'm understanding the why behind trading for a Jalen Ramsey. Plus, if you acquire him and that $18.28 million signing bonus salary cap hit goes into next year, Dave, all of a sudden you're looking at approximately $79 million over the cap. It's maneuverable, and we've talked about how you can do that. It's pretty easy to get back under the cap. The problem is, do you want to put yourself in a deeper hole with a guy that you don't know for sure is going to be playing at this high of a level long term? I don't know. The reason why we're talking about this, other than the Jalen Ramsey thing, is this exact contract structure that you are seeing on the screen right now is how the Philadelphia Eagles have won the Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts, $51 million a year, has this general form of a contract. Tons of option bonuses, roster bonuses. He's got like 6 void years already built in so they can continue to spread stuff out and out and out. AJ Brown, $32 million a year on a very similar contract structure. Saquon Barkley, same thing. Devontae Smith, Lane Johnson, Landon Dickerson, Jordan Mailata. They're all on this kind of contract. Because they're on this type of contract, it allows the Eagles to play and maneuver around. And they have put themselves in a window to win the Super Bowl. They just did. So this Jalen Ramsey contract itself, Dave, is really important to look at from a Vikings perspective, because this could be the key to unlocking a Super Bowl window. Not just having a young quarterback, not just having the ability to put all these pieces around him, but maximizing it even farther by utilizing this kind of structure and pushing money out, and trying to maximize how much talent you can have on the field right now. And I think this is different. Even though Rob Brzezinski is still doing the contracts here like he did for Rick Spielman, this isn't a Rick Spielman thing. Spielman signed a bunch of ugly contracts. He paid guys like Harrison Smith and Adam Thielen not for what they were going to do, but for what they had done. And Harrison Smith is still a very good football player. But at the time he signed it, there was no reason to give him a 4-year, $64 million extension. There was no reason to give Adam Thielen the same extension. They were not going to be worth what they were going to be paid when those contract extensions really hit. And because of that, they had to do some ugly math. They had to restructure contracts in a poor way to just save their own asses. The way that this is done, you're probably going to have some of that, and to a point, it's unavoidable. But one of the reasons why you do it this way is because it gives you maximum flexibility now and in the future. And the reason why you would want to do it is because $5 million now is probably going to be around $3 million in 4 years. So you can push it down the line and it will be a less expensive cost for you to pay later versus paying now. Because remember, you can take a salary cap hit right now of $20 million, or you can roll it over and that $20 million hits next year. And guess what? It's cheaper percentage wise on the cap, which is why the Eagles have been doing this for X amount of years. There will be times where you just have to, unfortunately, make a call and you just have to move on from a player. Dallas Goedert, they're probably going to end up moving on from because there are many reasons for Dallas Goedert, but you have to make some of those decisions. But if you draft well enough, which I think the Vikings have turned a corner on some of the draft strategies and the players that they've picked, then you can just continue to reload and reload and reload. And what Howie Roseman has done is he's using the wisdom of crowds, basically using the consensus board to be like, well, we're at 32 and then like the 19th player on the consensus board is available. Maybe we should just take him. And there is wisdom to that, because when you get that kind of steal, it oftentimes signals one of two things. Either it's a medical issue or off the field, or people are just dumb and you get to score. Quinyon Mitchell, they scored on big time last year. And then they got Cooper DeJean, who fell. And I'll be honest, I was not high on Cooper DeJean. But sometimes you're not high on a player, and he goes to a phenomenal situation for what the skill set is, and he maximizes it. And that's what Cooper DeJean did last year. He went to a perfect role, a perfect spot, and it maximized, and he was great. And sometimes you just be like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But when you put together a big board, sometimes you're not even considering team fit. You're just putting it together based on raw data. And you don't put that kind of context into a big board. All in all, this whole conversation has been, Dave, about how the Vikings can kind of utilize the Philadelphia Eagles strategy. And the Jalen Ramsey contract
evolved out of the New Orleans Saints strategy.
Well, the New Orleans Saints strategy is they're just stupid. The Eagles actually have really, I'm not going to call the Saints brass dumb, but they buried themselves a hole and they refuse to get out of it. They just continue to dig it deeper and deeper and deeper because their ladder's still big enough to climb out of the hole. But what the Eagles have done is they've just given themselves more flexibility and invested it in the right players, because I think that's a big part of it too. The Saints will just try big splashes to try big splashes, but they're not getting the right players under contract. They are making poor roster decisions. The Derek Carr contract is one of the worst in recent memory, and they're paying for it. Now he's retired. That is cap malpractice. What the Eagles are doing translates a lot more to what the Vikings can do, and use those option bonuses. I'd have to pull it up, but I believe Christian Darrisaw has those in his contract as well. Lucky part about streaming live on YouTube, which thank you, like, comment, and subscribe, do all those fun things for us, is you can look things up in real time. So right now,
speaking of which, Ramsey will be 31 October 24th.
And the one good thing about Ramsey is he played a lot of safety in college. So you could do it, but that's not what this conversation is about. This conversation is specifically about
finally do it.
Yep. The process and why the process matters and all of that. So when I take a look at Christian Darrisaw, he's getting an option bonus this year. Option bonus is going to be $4.45 million a year over the next 5 years, $22.25 million in option bonuses. Good for him. That rules. He's also going to have a lot of per game roster bonuses, which only some of them will be fully guaranteed this year. I believe he's going to have 7/17 of the $1 million that are going to be fully guaranteed because he only played in 7 games last year. And that's how the per game roster bonuses work. You play all 17, the whole thing's fully guaranteed on the salary cap, and then you'll get credit the next year for what they don't take. Which is why a couple years ago, when Zadarius Smith only played 1 game in 2021, when the Vikings gave him a bunch of per game roster bonuses, those didn't count on the cap until he earned them. And that matters. That factors in. So the Vikings are using an option bonus with Christian Darrisaw. And because they're using an option bonus with Darrisaw, it helps them spread out the cap. So this year, the cap hit's only $9.6 million. Next year, it's $23.14, then $24.8, then $31.1 in 2028. And by that point, you should probably have another extension, and then $28.45 in the final year, because he still has that final year will actually not have any of the prorated signing bonus attached to it. So this whole strategy of trying to maximize the window, it's all about trying to financially make the most sense. And I don't know if Jalen Ramsey is the right player, but the structure of his contract is a perfect example of why the Minnesota Vikings can utilize the Eagles strategy in order to make a Super Bowl run of their own. And I thought it was a really interesting exercise to have that conversation. Dave, I have kind of gone on a rant. I think Odie might have just peed on the air mattress behind me, because of course he did. That little tofurkey. You know, if I didn't love him and he didn't turn 3 on Saturday, I might throw him out the window. I would never do that. Please don't tell anybody I would do that. But he's a little turkey boy. What do you think of this whole thing? Not that Jalen Ramsey trade in itself, because we've already hashed that out. We've already said our piece, but the contract structure, the idea of utilizing option bonuses to keep pushing money out, where this isn't pushing money out like Rick Spielman. This is an intentional strategy and not a life support vest.
No, it's a good way to invest in the team. If you want to put it that way, you're banking on salary cap going up, and it should, and you're paying less percentage of cap on your dollar. That's smart. It's like investing.
Yeah, I think so too. It's
now
it's going to be really
continues because there are some teams that are whining about it. That's a different story. The cash poor teams that can't afford to put everything in escrow and all that are complaining. Yeah. You talked about the Raiders and beforehand. Well, one of those teams right now is Tim Lyons, who's in the chat, the Cincinnati Bengals. They're a cash poor team, and they have a hard time signing players.
See, that's an interesting one, because I'm wondering if it's more that they're cash poor or they're stupid. Because the Bengals ownership, they are not exactly what you would call. I mean, they are a cheap bunch, but they will pay market value, and they've done so with multiple players. They're just dumb. They paid Joe Burrow top of the market. They paid Jamar Chase more than Justin Jefferson. I think it was only by $100,000 a year. Yeah, I mean, they're basically identical as far as, hey, these guys are just elite.
And it's a year after JJ, so that's,
of course,
I'm cool with that.
So, whoa, Daniel, no more Busch Light. Why are we saying things like that in the chat? Why would you do that? Busch Light, good, yum. But I do find it.
Tim agrees.
The whole
stupid front office.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. That Goodell. So one thing to know about when Goodell talks, Goodell is paid $40 million a year to be the puppet of ownership. That's his job, to be their puppet, to say what they want, to do what they want, to do their bidding, because the owners pay him. Mm-hmm. That is his job. So when he says it, that means it's coming directly from ownership that, hey, we want to talk about this in the next CBA, and it won't come for years. The CBA is 10 years long, and I think there's an out after 6, maybe 7 years, where they can the sides can opt out, and then they can renegotiate and all that kind of stuff. But I find it interesting that teams are getting mad that other teams are just spending more cash and utilizing like void years and stuff, and they're mad about it. Like, the one interesting thing is how many teams are actually mad about it, because they should be able to do it too. But like I said, it's also hard because, like, if you look at me, my cash on hand is significantly less than my net worth, because my net worth, I could sell off all my assets. I could sell my house. I could sell my truck. I could sell my Warren Moon jerseys hanging in the background. And with all those factored in, I would then have a lot more cash on hand. And that's the conversation we're having with owners. They have to find a way to get that cash on hand. And how do they do that? They sell assets, and they get the cash that those assets are worth, whether it be something as simple as, hey, we just hold a bunch of stock and annuities and bonds, and we just need to cash them out. So then we can get that to put into escrow, which no big deal. That's more of, hey, just call your financial guy and just have them take care of it. But it's also like nobody's doing anything illegal. That's the interesting thing here. Everything that's in here, every team has access to and can utilize. Are we talking about this potentially being an unfair practice, Dave, because some teams have not put themselves in a situation where they can do it?
No, I don't think so. I think it's part of competition. Now, I saw a list here a week or two ago of where the owners rank in wealth. And the Wolves are down near the bottom, believe it or not. but they tend to have more cash on hand to be able to do things like this. They're smarter than other owners tend to be. We'll see. I think the smartest ones are the Waltons of the Broncos right now.
Mm-hmm.
But they tend to have always been that way. They're constantly improving the Minnesota Vikings since they purchased them 20 years ago today, I believe it is. And they're constantly investing money into the team, whether it was at Winter Park or, building the glorious facilities at Egan, to updating the Wi-Fi in the stadium to Wi-Fi 6 for this season. It's all, they're constantly pumping in liquidity, or at least doing that. And they do it not just for the facilities and the whole fans, enjoyment. They're doing it also for the players, so they can keep competitive over that time. They're living up to their portion of keep this team competitive that they told Kwesi during the whole time, so they didn't tear it down to the studs. And I don't think all owners get that. They may have earned their billions in other ways that it can't be that sort of deal. Maybe it's, because the Wilfs are in real estate versus how other people made it. The Waltons, obviously, Waltons or Walmart inherited it. But all, things like that. And then there's, of course, the Raiders, which was literally inherited, and it was a family business, and it was their only business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Waltons are an interesting one, because the Waltons, like, there are people who are well off. There are rich people. Then there are mega rich people. And then there's the Walton family. They are so rich, it's disgusting. It's gnarly how rich they are. The Khan family who own the Jacksonville Jaguars, they are also stupid rich. Like, they could drop $2 million in the street and it wouldn't matter. Kind of rich. Those teams, and I'm very curious, in the scope of world economics and stuff, I would be willing to wager that the Waltons have a lot of power, because obviously they have a ton of buying power with Walmart, but how much power do they wield within NFL ownership? Because the Waltons have only been the owners of the team for a few years. So what kind of cachet do they have? Because the Waltons would be an ownership group to take a look at this and be like, hey, I want to have the flexibility to do this. It's BS that you're trying to eliminate it. The use of void years and cash over cap and all that stuff. Because eventually that money does catch up to you. You can only do it for so long. But what kind of, do they have enough power? Like, Jerry Jones tried to go after Roger Goodell with the Ezekiel Elliott suspension, and he has been owner longer than almost everybody, and he got stonewalled. So would some of these richer ownership groups, who are relatively newer, the Khans are, I mean, they've been around for a while, but they're not exactly like legacy kind of owners. Like, before Irsay passed, Irsay is a legacy owner. His daughters are now legacy owners. The Paul Allen estate, after he passed away in Seattle, are legacy. Mark Davis is a legacy. Like, the Mara and Tisch family have owned the Giants since like the 20s. They're a legacy. So how much cachet can the super powerful and rich have in these meetings when you're talking to other super powerful and rich people? And I think that's going to be a really, really interesting element to this whole conversation. And the reason why we're talking about owners of other NFL teams is because this practice is being kind of under attack, for lack of a better term, because the what do you call it? Goodell said that, hey, we want to take a look at this in the next CBA. The Eagles just use this to win the Super Bowl. And I think it's just people are bitter that the Eagles did this and won a Super Bowl. And I wonder if players will be like, hey, just sign me to these kind of deals. And then you can be on the same path as the Eagles to win a Super Bowl. But not every team likes to do that. Every team has contract structures that they like to follow. The Vikings, when they sign 4 or 5 year deals, the first 2 years are cheap and then the money skyrockets. That's how they like to structure those. One of the reasons why, like with Will Fries, there's a $12 million out if he just ends up stinking over the first 2 years. And then they can save like almost $10 million on the cap if he just ends up being bad. So that's one of the reasons why they do that. There's also factors of, hey, after year 3, you're probably going to want to sign that really good player to an extension anyway, so it doesn't matter. There's a lot of different elements at play. But I find it really interesting when having the Jalen Ramsey conversation, which as a whole is tiresome. I really don't care if the Vikings get Ramsey. I don't want them to pay that contract. I don't want them to pay a lot of draft capital. But if he's here, I think he would be a massive help. But how his contract is structured will matter to the Minnesota Vikings. It will matter to how they want to approach a potential Super Bowl run. And I thought it was an important conversation to have, especially during a dead period right now. Big Railing Dad asked if Fries is still hurt. Yeah, they expect him to be full go by training camp. The Vikings medical staff is notorious, and I'm sure you guys have heard me say this many times. They're notorious for being over cautious.
Mm-hmm.
Because, well, there's nothing to win right now. Like, he doesn't need to do the individual workouts. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Once training camp comes in, then it's like, okay, we're willing to take a little bit more of a risk because this is a good learning time. We're going to have the pads on. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. But there was no point in having him in OTAs. He would not gain enough to risk, hey, he's only at about 90%. I bet you if a game had to have been played at the end of May, he probably could have gone. But they didn't feel the need to do that. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this manifests moving forward. And I'm excited to kind of see what that looks like from a short and long-term perspective. But yeah, Dave, that's our show.
Cool.
Good chat.
And according to Forbes, the estimated worth of the Wills are $1.3 billion, and it puts them 28th lowest in the league.
Mm-hmm. They're smart businessmen.
Yes, they are.
They're only worth $1.3 billion.
It shows Ziggy. Yeah, 1.3. I don't know if that includes Mark and the other third brother. I don't know. You know, they're also ownership groups where they have minority investors as well that show 1.3. Tied for 28th.
If it's just Ziggy, yeah, they have more money than that because, like, especially when you talk about Mark and the other partners and stuff, yeah, all that's going to matter. So the Vikings have had no issue fronting money. Let me tell you.
The one that's the least is Mike Brown, owner of the Cincinnati Bengals. Besides, I mean, the Packers count as 32, but 31 is Mike Brown.
Yeah. The Packers,
$925 million. Yeah. Just
they don't count the Packers.
Mm-hmm.
There will never be another ownership group like the Packers, and eventually, they may force the Packers to sell to a private entity and not be a publicly owned team. Because one of the things about being a publicly owned team is they have to release their financial data. And then that gives everybody else an understanding of what is going on.
Oh, here we go. T. Cooper says the Will family, including Mark, has estimated net worth of $5 billion.
That makes a lot more sense.
Pity.
Makes a lot more sense.
But it goes tied for 28th, Ziggy. Tied for 27th is Michael Bidwell, Arizona. Tied for 25th is Amy Adams Strunk, Tennessee, and I missed one. Tied for 28th is also Virginia Hallis, and 30th is Art Rooney II. Steelers. 24 is John Mara and Steve Tisch. 23 is Mark Davis. And,
wow, he's a lot higher than I thought.
Estimated $2.3 billion. Big chunk of that's probably the value of moving to Vegas. Then comes Dean Spanos at 2.4, who we talked about yesterday on Who Will Be King as part of the collusion accusation.
Yeah,
then comes Jim Irsay, who's no longer with us, and that's been split up amongst his daughters at 4.4. Jeff Lurie comes next at 5.3. Then 19, Janice McNair at 5.6. 18 at Denise DiBartola and Jed York, her husband, at 5.8. Then 17, Gail Benson, the Saints, 6.1. 16 is Kim and Terry Pagula, the Buffalo Bills. 15, Steve Biscotti, Baltimore Ravens at 7.1. 14, Jimmy and Dee Haslam at $8 billion. 13, Arthur Blank, $8.2 billion. 12, Josh Harris, Washington Commanders, $8.3 billion. 11, Glazer family, Buccaneers, $10 billion. Stephen Ross, Miami Dolphins, 10.1. Robert Kraft, Patriots, 11.1. Saeed Khan, Jacksonville, 12.2. Jerry Jones, 13.8. Johnson family of the Jets, 16. Stan Kroenke of the Rams, 16.2. Talk about a businessman, loves pinches pennies. Jody Allen in the Paul Allen Trust, the Seahawks, 20.3. David Tepper, Panthers, 20.6. Number 2 is the Hunt family for the Chiefs at 24.8. And the richest is the Walton Penner Group, headed by Rob Walton, at $77.4 billion with a B. It's a lot of
hot
change.
Damn.
And they're spending it. They're trying to build the practice facility over there into mirroring what ours looks like or better. In Miami's, they want to be number 1 on the report card.
Yeah. And I wonder if the Vikings are going to be able to get up to 2. I'm really really interested to see how this goes and how the Vikings end up kind of maneuvering forward with this whole process. But yeah, that is our show. We'll be back on Monday. But before Monday, don't forget 2 bloggers on Sunday. And we are going to have 2 shows next week. Well, maybe 1. We'll see how things go because where I live, there's a huge 4th of July celebration that goes like an extended weekend. So there might not be a show Thursday. I will communicate that ASAP. But we're getting a lot closer to training camp. We're going to start doing some deep dive preview stuff. We're going to talk about JJ McCarthy, I'm sure, a bunch. But I don't know how much more new stuff we can give you that we already haven't dove into already. But it's going to be a really interesting time for the Minnesota Vikings as they prepare to potentially make their first Super Bowl since before I was born. And boy, oh boy, would I like that. Please like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell. We'd like to get you guys who haven't subscribed yet to subscribe. We really haven't seen much subscriber growth in the last month. We'd love to see that kick up a little bit. And we know a lot of you watch, and we're so grateful for all of you that do. And on the podcast side, please subscribe to the podcast as well. We love all of you guys equally. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I am going to go cook salmon on the Blackstone. I'm Tyler. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love, our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching The Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!